But thanks to everybody for joining us. We're really excited about having a congressional town hall with our three national NOW PAC endorsed candidates. I'm Jerry Burton, co-executive director of Nevada Now. And I want to first thank the new political director, Kiana Dickinson. She's been so helpful in putting this evening together. And I'm excited to have someone to work side by side with. And just quickly, we'll introduce our board. Christian hasn't met our board either, so that's why I want to make sure we point everybody out. So wave if you're here. Sue Birch is our co-executive director, and she works on our PAC stuff and legislation with me. Eva Love, who you've met, is the director of membership volunteer coordinator. Madalena Robertson is the director of technology and media. I believe Madalena is in school right now in college, but she'll be meeting us afterwards. Sarah Evans is the director of fundraising. Michelle Maese is director outreach. Laura Campbell is director of actions. Samantha Glover is director of youth outreach. I don't know if she could make it. She's up in Reno and a student. She's 17, so we're excited to have her. Tricia Methner is the secretary, and Lenoring Briley is the treasurer. So CNN published a story yesterday noting that Nevada will tell the story in the 2022 election. And we say this, of course, every cycle. It's the most important election, but it's true in 2022. It's going to be crucial to electing progressive candidates who support NOW's core issues. And we wanted you to have an opportunity to get to know the Nevada congressional candidates who've been endorsed by the National NOW PAC. But first, I want to introduce our moderator. It's our National NOW president, Christian Nunes. We haven't had her on a program in a while. Christian became the NOW president in August of 2020. She was previously appointed vice president by the board in May of 2019. As the second African-American president in the organization's history, Christian is leading the organization through an intersectional lens, bringing a diverse coalition of grassroots activists to work against structural sexism and racism. She's a former NOW board member and committee chair, as well as a licensed clinical social worker, consultant, and a woman minority business owner. Christian's an active community organizer, a public speaker, and regularly featured on events such as March for Black Women, Women's March events, and rallies around the country. Christian launched key initiatives in NOW, such as Unlock the Future campaign, which demands humane treatment for detained immigrant families, NOW's Racial Justice Summit, and the Feminist Agenda campaign in partnership with the Black Women's Blueprint. Christian's a founder of a behavioral health and consulting practice. As an advocate for social justice and mental health policy, she's took up the role as chair of the Mayor's Commission on Disability Issues. She's often featured in media outlets including MSNBC, Business Insider, Prism, Politico, The Huffington Post, Ebony, Black Enterprise Magazine, Yahoo News, and many more national and local outlets. She received her bachelor's degree in social work from Northern Arizona University and her master's of science degree from Columbia University and the master of business administration from the University of Phoenix. So thank you, Christian, for being here tonight, and take it away with the questions.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here as your moderator. On behalf of Nevada Now, I thank you for welcoming me. And I just want to first give a thank you to Nevada Now for hosting this wonderful congressional town hall forum and all the hard work they've done and continuously do for NOW. And just been really leaders in all the work for legislation and just putting on amazing events. So I just want to thank them for all their hard work. And just ask we all give them a virtual high five and praise first before we get started. And then next, I just want to give thanks to all the congressional candidates who are here today, who are here to have the opportunity to give respectful conversation and dialogue, to let us know about your great platforms and your priorities to work toward a feminist agenda and your legislation and policymaking in the future. And so we have a really interesting conversation I'm looking forward to having, and I'm sure all of you are looking forward to hearing from them. We have candidates from the 1st, 3rd, and 4th district to hear from you today. So I just want us to hop right in and get us started. I also just want to, before I do that, also to give a shout out to our board, Nevada board as well. So I just want to thank everyone for being here and Jerry for all her hard work leading everyone. So first, I'm going to introduce Congresswoman Dina Titus. Dina is the Dean of Nevada's Congressional Delegation and is currently in her 6th term in the House of Representatives, Nevada's 1st congressional district. And she's been a lifelong supporter of protecting and expanding the rights of women, all women, and has been supported on vital bills like the Women's Health Protection Act to codify their rights to reproductive health care, and stated in Roe versus Wade. And she's also been an important player in the Equal Pay Act, which would ensure that every woman is given the opportunity to be a full participant in our democracy and our economy and our society as a whole. So we know how important equal pay is and equal access to abortion coverage and Health Insurance Act. She's been a part of that bill, which would also repeal the Discriminatory Height Amendment and the Equal Rights Amendment Act, which we all have been fighting for over 99 years. So it's been so important. She's taken some serious critical roles in supporting these legislations and bills. So we look forward to Dina. And this last year, was proud to vote for the FY22 budget for the first time in decades, which did not include the Height Amendment. Congresswoman Titus serves as chair of the Subcommittee of Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Maintenance under the Transportation and Infrastructure committees. And she also serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and Committee on Homeland Security. So we know that Congresswoman Dina Titus is a busy person, and she is there to keep the job done. Next, I'm going to introduce our next panelist and congressional candidate, Congressman Stephen Horsford. Congressman Stephen Horsford is proud to represent Nevada's, am I still pronouncing that right? I'm getting close. Nevada. Okay. I know I was not hearing it right. Nevada. Okay, work with the y'all because I know it didn't sound right from how you told me. Nevada. Nevada's 4th congressional district and our nation's capital. And as a lifelong Nevada resident, he understands the need of those who call the Silver State home. Before his time in public service, he led the Culinary Training Academy. He then served in Nevada State Senate and later ran for Congress. Now serving in Congress, Rep. Horsford is leading efforts to reduce crime and fund community violent interventions, enact responsible gun safety and background measures, and ensure children, families, and seniors can feel safe in their home, in their schools, and their neighborhoods. And last year, he introduced and voted for HR 3755, the Women's Health Protection Act as well, to ensure also equal access to abortion statewide. So he's also one of those people representing reproductive health care as well for us. And he's also advocated and voted for HR 7, the Paycheck Fairness Act, to also ensure equal pay and equal work. So that's important. So we want to welcome our Congressman Stephen Horsford. And last but not least, we want to welcome Congresswoman Susie Lee. Congresswoman Susie Lee was elected to serve in Nevada's 3rd congressional district in 2018. Susie has brought Congress to sustain common sense, bipartisan solution-oriented leadership that we need. She's employed as the founding director of the After School All-Stars and as the president of communities and schools of Nevada. I'm working on that, y'all. Keep giving me some time. And after being reelected in 2020, the Congresswoman was appointed to the Appropriations Committee, which she's put together on the front lines of protecting Nevada against attempts to make Nevada a dumping ground for nuclear waste in the Yucca Mountains. And she's put in her driver's seat to ensuring Nevada gets the funding it rightfully deserves. Having been first elected in 2018 as part of the biggest class of women and moms to ever serve in Congress, Congresswoman Lee has made sure that women's voices are at the front and center in Congress through her sponsorship of the Small Business Child Care Investment Act, which is crucially important, the passage of the Women's Health Care Protection Act, the passage of the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act, Paycheck Fairness Act, and Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and championing of public education, lower prescription drug costs. All important causes which we know now has also been fighting for. So let's welcome Congresswoman Susie Lee and all of our candidates. Now I would like to give each one of them, starting with Congresswoman Dina Titus, 1 minute to just kind of tell us and share a point about your own personal unique selves and special things about your district. So we want to start with Congresswoman Dina Titus, please.
Well, thank you, Madam President, and welcome to Nevada. We're delighted to have you here. I first ran for office in 1988, and that was during the fight for Question 7. That's when Nevada was on the forefront of trying to lock in protections that were found in Roe v. Wade. And NOW was very active in that. The women played a great part, many of them still here. NOW then kind of went away, and it's thanks to Jerry, who has gotten people re-engaged, gotten this organization growing and very active out there again. So she's a great person to have heading it up as part of your team, and I thank her and her folks here for all that they have done. Women's issues have always been critical to me. When I first started, there weren't nearly as many women in office as there are now, so it's nice to have some company. And what's happened is that women's issues are now an important part of the agenda, whether it's health care, equal pay, or women veterans. They used to be called the silent veterans. Violence against women, child care, all of those things now are being talked about. And in the past, they were kind of left behind or left at home. So thank you for your support. I'm glad to be here and happy to have this good conversation.
Thank you so much, Congressman Titus. Next, we'd like to hear from Congressman Horsford.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and it's great to be on with my colleagues, Congresswoman Dina Titus and Congresswoman Susie Lee. Thank you, Jerry, and the entire NOW board for your leadership here with Nevada Now, and to the National Organization for Women for hosting this important discussion and for supporting me and my colleagues on this call as partners in the advancement of gender equality. As we all bear witness the headlines of state and national attempts to restrict women's reproductive rights, to infringe on voting rights, and codify discrimination against our LGBTQ friends and neighbors, we have to remind ourselves that this is an important moment in our history, and we will not go back to the days where women are not availed to their own rights to make decisions about their own health care, or where our votes are suppressed at the ballot box. Now in Congress, my colleagues on this call, the Zoom and I, we've made progress in certain areas in helping our constituents recover from the effects of this pandemic, which unfortunately were disproportionately impacted by women and people of color, women of color specifically. So anyone who has had to fill up their gas tank, or with the rising cost of healthcare, the amount of costs for childcare, these are real issues that we're working to tackle every single day. Well, first you have to acknowledge that they're real problems, and then you have to work towards bringing those solutions forward. So I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight on the critical issues that your members have, and those who are tuned in and who are worried about all the issues that are facing their households. And I want to make sure that we provide you with accurate information on how Congress is working to address these concerns. So thank you for allowing me to participate today.
Thank you very much, Congressman Horsford. And next we'll hear from Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you, Madam President. It's really an honor to be here with you, as well as all of these incredible members of Nevada Now, who have literally, as Congresswoman Titus said, have been at the forefront of fighting for women's rights for a long time. And a special shout out to Jerry as well for her leadership. And it's an honor to join Congressman Horsford. Listen, Nevada Now is an organization that's near and dear to my heart. As one of 7 children, 7 sisters, also a mother of a daughter, and more importantly, part of the largest incoming class of women in Congress's history. It's really, and by the way, that would not happen without the grassroots work of organizations and women like you who are here on this call. It's really an honor for me to be here with you. Whether we're talking about fighting for reproductive rights or supporting the Violence Against Women Act, access to affordable child care, paid family leave, the bill that we passed, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It's so important that women are at the forefront and at the core of everything we're fighting for, because women's issues are everyone's issues. They're economic issues, they're social issues, they're political issues. And so it's an honor for me to be here and have this important conversation with all of you. And I know I can speak on behalf of all of us that we're not going to quit fighting to make sure that women continue this fight and continue to be represented in the halls of power and continue to have equal access and work to make sure that we don't roll back all that we have fought for and won. So honored to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Lee. So let's get started with our town hall, and I'm going to have some questions for you, and I'm going to give everyone a chance to answer the questions. So the first question I have, I'm going to start with Congresswoman Titus. And this question is something I think is dear and near to all of our hearts. It's been what we've been hearing about, literally, I feel like every day or week after week, about a new abortion ban or a new restriction. And we know the Supreme Court's decision regarding Dobson versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization could very well dismantle or overturn Roe versus Wade and threaten legal access to abortion across this country. And also from that, we know that if that happens, there's a possibility for 23 states to inflict trigger laws. So we are very thankful that all of you, and many of you are sponsors of the Women's Health Protection Act that passed the Congress, but it didn't pass the Senate. So my question for you, Congressman Titus, starting off, and then we're going to just kind of go down the row, Congressman Horsford and Congressman Lee, you can answer afterwards. What do you think are other ways that Congress can protect a person's right to abortion if it is overturned?
Well, as you mentioned, we are all co-sponsors of the bill that would lock in Roe v. Wade. And Nevada is very fortunate. We have already done that through the initiative process, and that cannot be changed without a vote of the people. And the vote of the people right now, about 70% of folks in Nevada still support maintaining those protections for women. So I don't think it will happen here, but you are so right. Around the country, as fast as they can go, I think Oklahoma was the last one, they are trying to take away that right. And when you look at the membership of the Supreme Court now, we are afraid they are right in line with that backwards mentality. There are things you can do that aren't directly abortion, that affect abortion, that we ought to be doing. You know, a lot of things pass out of the House and then go to the Senate to die. And this protection of a woman's rights to choose, make her own health care decisions is one of them. It's over there and gone to die, and you're not going to get it moving because of the whole way the filibuster works. So I would say the first thing you can do is get rid of the filibuster, so they can't block a law with not having a majority. I mean, it should be 50% plus one, not 60% or 60 votes. So let's get rid of the filibuster. I think that's one thing we can do. Now, that's not easy to do, but we certainly ought to be trying to do it and talking about it. There are several other bills that are out there that affect abortion. One is called the Equal Access to Abortion Coverage in Health Care, so that we protect the right of people who have health insurance to have abortions covered by the benefits of that health insurance. I think that's very important. Also, for the first time in a long time, we supported the FY22 budget without the Hyde Amendment in it. So that's critical, keeping the Hyde Amendment out. We know that this issue doesn't stop at the border. Under the last administration, Trump put in place a global gag order, so we can't give aid to any organizations that might be engaged in advising or helping or in any peripheral way with abortion. That's to get rid of that is called the GLOBE Act. That's an acronym, Greater Leadership Overseas for the Benefit of Equality. We should get rid of that because our assistance to these countries, which hurt the poorest the most, shouldn't be tied to their position on abortion. There's also a bill called Global Health Empowerment and Rights Act, the HER Act. That would prevent any future president from imposing an international gag law. And finally, I would just remind you that before Obamacare was passed, being a woman was a pre-existing condition. And so those things, that bill, though not directly abortion bill, certainly had an impact on a woman's health and right to determine what her health care should be. So it can be directly abortion. It can be about the gag law. It can be extending it beyond U.S. boundaries. It can be health care in general, and can be getting rid of the filibuster. There are a number of fronts on which we can fight.
And
Thank you so much. I'm going to move it over to Congressman Horsford.
thank you. Well, I agree with everything that Congresswoman Titus just laid out and all the priorities. I would just add that in addition to the Women's Health Protection Act, which, look, that is a very important measure. I want to commend NOW for the leadership. I'm a member of the pro-choice Congressional Caucus for the reason that has been laid out, that we need to continue to do everything that we can to advance legislation to protect a woman's right to make these decisions on her own with the care of her physician. But I also wanted to add to the fact that we also have to support repealing the Hyde Amendment, which prevents federal funds like Medicaid from being used for abortion. We know that this harmful provision currently impacts women of color and low-income women in particular. That's why last year I was proud to join with Congresswoman Barbara Lee as a co-sponsor of her bill. Another key element that's being worked on, and we actually made some advancement on this particular measure, is the Omnibus Act. And specifically the Black maternal health provisions that my colleagues, Representative Lauren Underwood and Senator Cory Booker, have introduced, which would be a multi-agency effort to help improve maternal health among women of color, veterans, and vulnerable populations, and to address maternal mortality rates among racial groups and other tribal populations. This is something that, again, Nevada has been a leader on. I know that Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe-Moreno and Assemblywoman Claire Thomas have been leading on this measure here in Nevada, and we need to codify those measures at the federal level as well. So I agree with everything that we need to do because it's about access, it's about protecting people's care that they have now while we work to codify the right to seek reproductive justice in whatever form a woman decides.
Congressman Horsford. Congresswoman Lee?
Thank you. I'm not going to comment too much on this because I think both Dina and Stephen have really been thorough. Obviously, our role in passing the Women's Healthcare Protection Act was an incredibly important move, as well as our work on appropriations to make sure that the Hyde Amendment was not included in the fiscal year 2022 spending bills. But, you know, when I think about women's access to abortion, really, to me, it's about access to essential health care. And the work that we did, whether, you know, when coming out of this pandemic with the CARES Act to make sure that we expanded the ACA subsidies so we could expand access to health care. You know, as Stephen said, the Omnibus bill that really expands access to maternal health care. as well as the Pregnant Worker Workforce Fairness Act, continuing to make sure that we're opening up early care so that women are, one, comfortable with their doctors, they know their doctors, they access their doctors so that they have the ability to make this incredibly important decision between themselves and their doctors. And we'll continue to fight to make sure that we protect their right to do that. Also, what we've done with our bills is basically put women front and center in terms of everything we did with economic recovery, because we knew that they were the most hard hit by the pandemic. And so I think that, continuing what we do is to make sure that we're putting women at the core and at the forefront of everything we do when it comes to economic policy, when it comes to access to essential health care, and make sure we continue to fight for the fact that access to an abortion is access to essential health care.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. And I think that you all have said such vital, important parts, and that is recognizing that abortion is health care, and part of protecting it is also looking at women's health as a holistic system and an ecosystem. You can't just take it piecemeal. It's that we have to address it holistically and securing it from all different sides. So I really appreciate all of you recognizing that and working hard and fighting for that. One of the important things I noticed you all mentioned is the economic portion of the need to provide access and support. And that takes me into my next question for you all. We know that during the pandemic and economic insecurity was a major issue for women. We heard about the She session that took place. We know that women were significantly impacted during the pandemic, losing most jobs, having to take off work either by choice or because they had to care for their kids, or unwilling to because they had to make different choices. They were also essential workers, frontline workers, but they were the hardest hit economically. And also we know women of color, and also Nevada was hardest hit, being a hotel, restaurant, tourist industry, more than most states. What legislation have you sponsored to help with housing insecurity, affordable child care, and access to paid leave to help these women get back to work so that they don't have to choose whether to feed their families or maintain a job or to have child care or to work? So we're just looking to hear from you all. I'll start with you, Congresswoman Susie Lee.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, what we did with respect to the American Rescue Plan and the CARES Act, the child tax credit, was so essential. $600 million was received by Nevada families. That means 590,000 children in our state were aided by this essential aid. And we know that it reduced childhood poverty by over 40%. As an education advocate on the ground, working to make sure that we we provide access to quality education for all of our students is so essential. One of the things that's been important that we've seen, especially as we've seen women drop out of the workforce, is access to affordable childcare. As part of the Build Back Better agenda, we advocated and supported the passage of limiting it to 7% of income. But I also introduced a bill, HR 3155, the Small Business Child Care Investment Act, which basically what it does is expand access to key small business administration loans for nonprofit child care providers. We know that when women access child care, it comes in a whole slew of forms, whether you're sending it to, the Children's Express facility, or you're going to your church, or you're going to your neighbor who's been licensed. But what this does is allow key nonprofits to access the loans so that they can continue to expand their facilities. Because as we continue to fight to make childcare more affordable, we have to make sure we provide those options for those childcare providers to be able to be more affordable. So that's a bill that I introduced and really proud to have introduced and worked on.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, and can we have Congressman Horsford?
Thank you. Well, first, let me give a shout out to Michelle Mace with SEIU, the first Black woman president of the local here, because really SEIU represents those frontline essential workers, predominantly who were women of color, who had to keep working, many of them, because they were considered essential workers, but they weren't given essential pay. They weren't given essential child care funding. They weren't given essential paid leave to care for a loved one or a sick child. And so as we recover, we need to be very intentional about how we do this in a way that really focuses on those who were hardest hit during the economy. This is what's so troubling about the rhetoric coming from the other side is somehow they think that investing in child tax credits, which is a tax credit, it's not an entitlement program. So just like very wealthy people and big corporations get tax credits, when Republicans are in charge, when Democrats in charge, we decided to give the tax benefits to the 97% of children or families with children in our districts. And in my district alone, that has helped nearly 50% of our children to be lifted out of poverty. Well, now we need to keep them out of poverty. And how do we do that? Yes, we have to have work support like childcare. We have to have better access to public transit. We need to address the climate crisis. But we also have to help people be equipped with the skills and the training that they need. And that's why I know Congresswoman Titus, Congresswoman Lee, and I have all supported efforts, including our bill around the National Apprenticeship Act that would help create 1 million apprenticeship programs across the country. But guess what? To make it intentional to include more women, particularly women of color who have historically been left out of some of these opportunities in the past. So with all of the women that are part of this conversation, it's about shaping our policies in a more equitable and inclusive way. And by equity, I also mean gender equity and equality. Finally, I want to just touch on the Home Means Nevada initiative, which Dina Titus, Susie Lee, and I all joined in a press conference with the governor because of funding that we approved through the American Rescue Plan. Nevada has been able to dedicate $500 million, the largest investment ever for affordable housing, something that we hear from our constituents about all the time. So these are the supports that all families need, but particularly women. And these are the priorities that we're going to continue to work on, not only to pass in Congress, but to make sure that they get implemented in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Horsford. And Congresswoman Titus.
Thank you. Well, as you can tell by what we've all been saying, we work really well as a team. Most of the efforts are joint efforts by all of us, and we try to take advantage of the committees that we serve on to give Nevada the full package. And I believe that we are doing that. And I thank Stephen and Susie for all of their efforts because it benefits all of our constituents. One thing that I was able to do that I'm proud of is being the chair of the Economic Development Subcommittee. I pushed very hard for the formula to include unemployment. Originally, the recovery programs were based just on population. Now, we wouldn't get very much money here in Nevada based on population because we're not a very big state. However, we had the highest unemployment in the country. It was at 35%. You haven't seen that since the Great Depression. And so getting population to also, that formula to also include unemployment got an extra $1 billion for the state of Nevada. We got more money than Utah did, for example, and they have a larger population. So when that money came to the state, local government, school districts, counties, and the state were able to take that money and use it for programs needed here. Stephen mentioned Home Means Nevada. That's one that came out of the money that we sent. And it was a deliberate determination not to put too many strings attached to it, because what works in Las Vegas may not work in Seattle, may not work in Boston. We wanted local governments to decide what they needed and be able to use the money without having too much regulation or reporting. It's all transparent, but they got to make those decisions. And I think that works best. I know I went around with the treasurer and the governor and some members of the legislature having hearings kind of like this one, where the public came and said, this is what we need. And you had a lot of women at those hearings talking about the need for better education and some predictability to the education, but also worried about violence in schools. And I think that's a very important issue. You heard talk about the whole child care issue. You know, women are kind of that sandwich generation, not alone, but they take the primary burden to be able to take care of the children and then also take care of the parents. And so you need that child care, but you need respite care too, because, you know, taking care of a parent who may be ill or just old and needs extra help, it can be a real burden on an individual, and it most often falls to women. So the money that we can put in respite care, I think, is also really important. You know, so many things come back to us. Workforce training. A lot of people who were on those frontline jobs, and as Stephen said, weren't getting paid frontline wages or getting frontline benefits, don't want to go back to that. They want to go back to something better. So putting money into workforce training where people can learn a new skill, keep up with what's the future, try to participate in a global competitive marketplace, I think has also been very important for women. You know, that raising that minimum wage is so important and shouldn't be considered a minimum. It should be considered a living wage. And I know our frontline workers through SEIU have been out front on that. And now teachers are doing the same thing. Again, predominantly women saying it's time for 20. And so it is time to address that. But some of the things that we did in the Recovery Act are very good for families. That was our agenda. That was the president's agenda. And we need to brag about those more, not talk about what we didn't get done, because there's always something else. But let's talk about what we did get done, because it has made a real difference.
Absolutely, Congresswoman Titus. Thank you for bringing it up as well, because I think that's a great point to talk about what has gotten done and the accomplishments we have made. Because this is like the first time that we've been fighting for childcare for so long, and we've been fighting for these improvements for women for so long. And this is really the first in a long time we've really seen women really be recognized and starting paying attention to the need for care support and care infrastructure, including, you know, things like the Pregnant Women Fairness Act and the Child Tax Care Credit. And even starting to even consider the fact that we do need elder care infrastructure and child care infrastructure. So we are seeing that. And as we talk about unions and bringing up Michelle Mace, who's on the Nevada Now board and president of the SEIU Nevada, I think this is a great time to kind of talk about this conversation about how we do support women more and unionize women. I think just recently we saw amazing things that happen with Amazon becoming, you know, the Amazon workers unionizing themselves and coming, you know, and coming together and forming together to help themselves, you know, organize and to get unionized. And we know that when people are unionized, they make an average, women in particular make an average of 23% more when they are not in a union. And they are more likely to get more benefits, paid leave, stronger protections against discrimination and sexual harassment. So what can Congress do to help protect people's right to organize in their workplaces? And I'm going to start with Congressman Horsford for this question.
Well, thank you, President Nunes. I come out of the labor movement when I ran the Culinary Academy. I'm a member of Culinary Local 226 for more than 10 years. And so, you know, I've seen the struggle that working people have faced. And what I will just begin by saying is unions built the middle class. And without unions, we would not have the protections that workers have today. Now, unfortunately, because of the attempts by the far right, they've tried to weaken people's right to organize and to take away people's right to have a voice to collectively bargain. I'm one of the founders and now co-chairs for the first ever Congressional Labor Caucus. It's a caucus now over 106, 110 members of the House. And our whole purpose is to make sure that labor has a voice in every major decision that gets made, whether it was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, definitely pushing for the PRO Act, reforms to the Postal Service, but also protecting things like the public sector, which women, again, and women of color disproportionately are in public sector positions in government at the federal, state, and local level. And so again, while Republicans try to weaken or dismantle or defund those sectors, Democrats are working to make sure that those workers, particularly women in the workplace, have the right to organize. So I'm really proud of Michelle as just an example of one of the leaders that we have, women leaders. I'll just say leaders, because I don't think you have to qualify it as a woman. She's just a great leader of the SEIU. We have the Secretary Treasurer for the Nevada State AFL-CIO, Susie Martinez as well. And these are leaders who are helping to move the labor movement forward, not only here in Nevada, but across the country. And we have to hold Democrats accountable to standing with labor as well. For too long, some Democrats speak the talk, but then when it's time to actually vote, they're not there on key issues. So we have to be held accountable as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Horsford. Congresswoman Titus, can I have your
Yes, thank you. I'm proud to have a 100% voting record with labor. I always say that in every speech I give. And I am not afraid to use the word union either. I feel like these are my brothers and sisters. And so I talk about the union. Stephen and I are both co-sponsors of the PRO Act. It's passed in various forms out of the House. We keep adding it to different bills, trying to get it out of the Senate. Hopefully that we can, but maybe that's another reason to get rid of the filibuster, whether it's abortion or voting rights or right to organize. We shouldn't be sending this good legislation over to the Senate to die. I think unions are kind of that old saying, it's the tide that lifts all ships. It lifts up its own members. It lifts up their families. It sets a good community standard and forces non-union businesses to meet some of their whether it's salaries or benefits in order to be competitive. And so everybody benefits when you have a strong union community. Las Vegas is a union town. Unions built this town. They serve it. They take care of it. Go back to the Hoover Dam. Unions are a big part of politics here, and we shouldn't forget that. The apprenticeship programs in unions should be supported. Programs that allow for workforce development are all supported by unions, but the basic thing is that the right to organize and have a voice, whether it is about salaries, about benefits, about safety on the job, all of that's critical. And, I often talk about our very powerful culinary union. That union has allowed people to work in the back of the house so their children can work in the front of the house. And that kind of sums up the way that unions have contributed to this community in building trades and culinary and public service as well.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Titus. And Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you. Listen, I think one of the most important things we did in the House was pass the PRO Act, which was a landmark piece of legislation that I voted for, protecting workers' ability to collectively bargain and to organize, and more important, to hold employers accountable. I will say that, there's so many opportunities we have to stand with labor and stand with unions in Congress. And the recent passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act is a key example, making sure that the billions of dollars we are going to invest in building roads and bridges and investing in broadband in our airports is done with good paying union jobs, making sure that we continue to, number one, put provisions into key pieces of legislation that we pass. That infrastructure package was a key piece of legislation that really came through bipartisan work that we worked together to get it passed. This is, when you talked, Madam President, about, let's talk about what we did do in Congress. In this, investment in infrastructure, this is this historic investment in infrastructure, hadn't been done for decades. We, the Democrats, with President Joe Biden, led the way and got that investment made. And more importantly, we put in a provision to make sure that everything being built would be built with good paying union jobs. And then finally, continuing, and no matter where you turn, if you're not paying attention, every chance our Republican counterparts will get, they will tear down protections. They'll first go after public employees, our federal employees, and we all have to be vigilant and continue to fight that. But I will tell you that, you have three champions here who will continue to fight to make sure that our union brothers and sisters and their rights are protected. Because, I just went today to the Iron Workers Apprenticeship Program. And to think that, first of all, there were 2 women there, which I love to see. There were 30 men there. Majority of them are born and raised here. They'll come out of that apprenticeship program earning at least 3 figures, and we'll have key protections. And it's so important that we continue to fight that. And we know that it's not, women in particular benefit, because we need, benefit from that ability to be able to collectively bargain and to have that say in workplace rights. And we'll continue to fight for that.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lee. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation and discussion, and I have one last question for all of you, and then I'm going to turn over to Nevada President Jerry Burton to wrap us up. But I would be remiss if I did not bring up this question, because what we're talking about right now is important of women and our future and our protections. And I'm so thankful for all of the hard work you all three have been doing to push forward for the protections and advancement of women's equity and parity in this world. But one of the United States, and one of the things but we have to recognize is that currently we still do not have the ratification of the ERA, right? And if we had the ERA ratified into our Constitution, a lot of these protections we wouldn't have to be fighting for so hard. Because we would clearly recognize as women, and we would clearly recognize in the Constitution, and these provisions would be something that we wouldn't have to recognize, we wouldn't have to be fighting for so hard, right? So I want to just pull that out there, because I think sometimes we think about it and people say, oh, we already have this. We don't already have it. We still need it. Nevada was the 36th state, and the 38 states needed to ratify. So yay for Nevada, as always, making the way for us. But it still has not been published by the archivist. And earlier this year, President Biden said he would keep his promise during his election to make sure when he took office that the archivist published the ERA. So we still want to make sure that we have Biden, make sure this happens for us, because it's been 99 years or more that we've been fighting for this. So we want to ask you all, as supporters, strong supporters, what do you plan on doing to make sure that we have the ERA ratified into our Constitution? And so I'll start with you, Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I was so proud to help pass a measure that would advance the ERA and remove the long expired deadline for ratification. But not only that, join 90 of my colleagues to send a letter to the U.S. Archivist to urge him to certify this amendment. We all know that the time is now. It is long past due, and we will continue to fight until this is ratified.
And Congressman Horsford.
Ditto. I will just commend Jerry and the entire Nevada Now organization, our friend and colleague, State Senator Pat Spearman and her leadership in Nevada, and all the work that you all have done across the country to get other states to ratify. But we will do what we can to push President Biden to keep his promise on the ERA as we push him to keep the promises like appointing the first Black woman to the United States Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson.
And last but certainly not least, Congresswoman Titus.
Well, thank you. I agree. I'm on all those same measures too. And once again, get rid of the filibuster because you're not going to get anything out of the Senate until you do. And what an exciting day to see the swearing in of our new justice. I mean, that was just kind of world changing, I believe, and so overdue and so inspirational. You know, when I used to teach UNLV political science classes, and we talk about the Equal Rights Amendment, there was a misinformation out there then. You heard people, oh, it's going to let men go to the ladies' restroom. Oh, it's going to put women on the front lines in war. Oh, it's going to do all of this. And I say, have you read it? It's only one sentence, just like one sentence long. That's all it is. And it does have a lot of power, a lot of influence. And just the fact that we've had it out there pending and more states have gotten on board have forced some societal changes. And that's a good thing. But you need the symbolism of having that amendment added because symbolism strengthens and informs policy. So even though we made some gains that we didn't have before this debate started, it's not enough. We need to get this added to the Constitution, and we'll all fight to try to make that happen.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank all of you for taking time of your busy days to come and spend time with us and share with everyone all the hard work you've been doing and that you continue to do in your commitments. And thank you for allowing me to moderate and just be a part of this. And I hope to continue to work with all of you as well in DC. And I'm going to turn it over back to Jerry so Jerry can take over the rest and close this out.
Well, we'd kind of promised them they could each have a minute to close out. So I'll say something real quick.
Yes.
And then it's okay. Because I'm going to put them on the spot too. So I love the question, the answer on the ERA question. You know that if anybody who knows me knows it's my passion. One of the things we did was we met with our senators in Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto, and they made a video showing their support of the ERA and asking the archivist and Biden to do something. So I'm just asking that maybe you consider doing that. So it was something we could post and show our support of our electeds. And so it'd be wonderful if you did. So if you want to go in, I guess, the order that you started, we could have Dina maybe say a minute each, something each for a closing.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of the bases, and yeah, we'll all do a video, and thank you for providing that. You know, it's also about coalition building, and NOW is such an important voice here locally, but you're also in coalitions with other progressive groups, with environmental groups, with groups on gun violence. And, you know, the louder the voice is, the more power that you have. So I commend you for doing that outreach on those kind of issues as well, because all you have to do is scratch the surface just a little bit and you see how they all impact women probably more than anybody, certainly women and children. So thank you for doing this and for letting me be part of it.
Thanks, Dina. And before the next one goes, I always say every issue is a woman's issue. So if we don't work in coalition with all these groups. It helps us as well. So thank you for bringing that up. So Stephen, you want to go next? Congressman Horsford.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Madam President, and my colleagues and all of you who have participated in this thoughtful discussion on so many critical issues. And I'll just close by saying, Nevada is, like always, kind of the centerpiece of the 2022 election cycle, and holding the House, the Democratic majority in the House, and winning and holding more seats and winning more seats in the Senate runs through Nevada. And so all of these issues that we've talked about, from equal rights to reproductive care to workers' rights to the dignity of the LGBTQ community, is on the ballot. So I just encourage everyone watching to make sure that we're all registered to vote, that our family and friends are registered to vote, and more importantly, once we're registered to vote, that we get out during the Nevada primary on June the 14th and November 8th to make sure our voices are heard at the ballot box, because clearly there are attempts to suppress all of our votes. So thank you. I appreciate being able to participate. This has been a great dialogue.
Congresswoman Lee, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. And, as Stephen was speaking, I thought about just the fact that it took us to pass our budget to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. That was held up in the Senate under Republican leadership. And so Stephen couldn't be more point on. And Jerry, as you said it, we always say 2018 was the most important election. 2020 is the most important, but 2022 really is the most important because of all we fought for and how far we have come. And we have evidence. We see that when Republicans are in charge, in power, the first thing they do is pull back protections against families and against women. And I always say it frustrates the hell out of me when the other party's called the party of family values. When I think about supporting families so they can have access to affordable childcare, supporting women so they can have access to affordable health care, making sure that all students have quality education, making sure that we provide families with the resources so they can care for their elderly parents and they can care for them in dignity in their home. That's what we're talking about when we talk about family values. And women are at the core of that fight. And we will continue. And Stephen's so right that the path to victory and the path to making sure that we hold on to these vital rights that we have all fought for so hard, and many of you much longer and harder than I have, is at stake. And it's at stake right here in this state. I think we just found out today the Senate Leadership Fund just invested $15 million in an ad buy against Catherine Cortez Masto. We've all had millions of dollars spent already advertising against us. But we know in Nevada that when we organize, we win. And you, all of you at NOW, know what's at stake. And I will say the other days I ran into someone who was a supporter, and she said, I'm sitting out this cycle. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah. And then her next breath, she said, but isn't that great news about Ketanji Brown Jackson? I'm like, you do understand that this is related, right? That we would not have her if we did not have a majority in the Senate. So we don't have time to sit out. This is the most important election for us too. We know, we've seen it across state after state after state in this country. We know what will happen if we lose control of the House. I know that you're all standing with us, and we all three are going to fight like hell, because this is, literally the life of our families is at stake. And so I'm excited for this fight. We're going to win it. And we got a lot more work to do.
Jerry, can we take
Yes, go ahead, Dina.
Can we take a picture and tweet it out and say
Of
we had
course.
a conversation? Also,
Yeah.
then I want to say, grab those pink pussy hats and get out there in the streets.
Thank you. Yes. Is Demi taking a picture?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great.
Okay, is everyone ready? 3, 2, 1. Great. Thank you.
Thanks for
All right.
having it.
Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening, and let's get out there and campaign. Help people
Yes.
campaign.
Thank
you
you
so
all.
much, Jerry.
Great night, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kiana, for helping me set everything up.